I'm Jeff Koinange, and this is Jeff Koinange Live. Tonight, a subject that is little talked about on the continent, and maybe for some good reason. We're talking about intelligence gathering, especially when it comes to terrorism and extremism, the rise of radicalization. We've seen that across the continent in the last decade. Well, recently, there was a conference right here in Kenya, bringing together all or most of the intelligence services across the continent. Because when something like Westgate happens, when something like Boko Haram kidnaps 200 school children, we need to know who's behind that, and more importantly, why. The conference was put together by the Committee on Intelligence and Security Services across Africa, CISA. And on the bench today is a man who has studied intelligence for several years now. He heads the African Union's committee, or rather the Center for the Studies and Research into Terrorism. And he's going to talk about the rise of radicalization, the rise of terrorism, more importantly, how the continent can combat it. On the bench, Ambassador Francisco Caetano Jose Madeira. That's right, sounds Portuguese. He's Mozambican. Ambassador, did I get the name right?
Yes.
Francisco Caetano Jose Madeira.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for coming on the show, because I think it's a really important subject that not many people talk about, and we should more. I guess the fundamental question is, are we winning the war on terror in Africa?
Yes, definitely. This is a relatively recent phenomenon on the continent. And we are doing fairly well in terms of getting better organized to face it. And I have been around the continent. I've visited many member states, and I have seen a total commitment of those member states to face and fight terrorism.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, okay, when you see states like Mali, let's go across the continent, because you're an expert on the continent. States like Mali, last few years, civil war. States like Central African Republic now, breaking down. States like Southern Sudan, if you will, there's civil war there now. And of course, we have to mention Somalia. Every time we think that we're taking one step forward, it looks like we're taking several steps backwards.
Well, these are exceptions to the majority. Don't forget that the African Union is made up of 54 member states. And the country that you have mentioned is just a minority. It is true that there is a social, political strife in those countries. It's really regrettable that that is so, but that is the reality. We have to face it. What we need to do is to make sure that those countries overcome these problems and come back to the fold and continue to work for their people. These countries are there to serve their people, to bring schools to the population, bring health services to the population, feed the population by creating employment, and so on and so forth, and ensuring their security.
But at the same time, the terrorists know this, and they capitalize on it. They go for that youth that's unemployed. They go for that youth that's poor. They go and they brainwash with the promises that their families will be taken care of for the rest of their life. How do you combat that?
Well, you see, terrorism is an extremely complex situation, phenomenon. It's not a crime like any other normal crime. It is a crime that is wound up with the political, social, ethnic, historical issues that mingle and then radicalize people and lead people to taking up arm or opting for violence. So we need to tackle this problem not on one way alone, but in this global approach. The global approach implies a number of lines, directions. The first direction is to ensure that our people, the youth particularly, is informed about what is this of international terrorism and domestic extremism and radicalization. They must know. Measures must be taken so that people know that there is radicalization, there is extremism, there is international terrorism on the continent, in the member states. The second, we must deny terrorists, particularly jihadists, those who come from outside and radicalize our population, deny them the possibility of accessing and recruiting and radicalizing our people. Yes, we do that by effectively addressing those conditions that are likely to that are conducive to terrorism.
Yeah, but Ambassador, how do you convince an illiterate young man in the middle of nowhere, where there's no internet, where there's no TV, in some village somewhere, and you come in? How do you convince that young man that he's not going to take that $100,000? How do you convince him?
Well, television and internet are a very recent phenomenon on the continent, and yet we exist ever since. There was no terrorism then. Then how was it happening? So the fact that we don't have internet there is not the problem. The problem is whether we as a state, whether we as a society reach out to those populations and protect them against these terrorists by warning them, by creating resilience in them that this danger is coming. These people behave in this way. These people are coming with a narrative that seems to be attractive, but it's a lie. We need, and by also listening to them and see what are possible sources of grievances and try to address them, whatever they are.
Ambassador, I've always asked myself this question. I'm sure a lot of viewers are wondering right now. What possesses a young man or woman to strap on a vest laden with all kinds of explosives, walk into a bus, walk into a building, walk into a premises,
yes,
and blow themselves up? What possesses that kind of person?
Again, as I said, many reasons. Many reasons. There could be a grievance of some kind. There could be revenge. There could be even naivety. There could be ignorance. There could be many reasons. There could be that they are in an environment that has rejected them, that is alienating them, that is excluding them, that is not giving them what they think that legitimately they should have. They're not giving them employment. So government and community must look at all these elements that are likely to be exploited by terrorists to take our children to their side. So we need to be close to the community. The government must establish partnership with the community. Terrorists, jihadists, when they come to us, live in the communities. We need to warn that community. We need to work with that community. We have to befriend those communities so that they work with us, they understand that security is important, that the establishment of security in the country is good for them, for us, and for the entire country.
Yeah.
Once they understand this, it is very possible for us to work with them to identify, denounce these terrorists and arrest them.
Ambassador, are there some countries, some institutions, some capitals that are considered soft targets? For instance, Nairobi. Is Nairobi considered a soft target?
Well, I don't know what is not a soft target, because terrorists use different methods to get their way. Yes. Well, when you have so many people, when you have a hub in terms of the region, an important economic center and all that, people tend to come around and see if they can satisfy their interests, blow places and whatever. Yes, and particularly when a country like Kenya is surrounded by countries and by people, by situation, by a country like Somalia, where there is a lot of strife.
So we become easy?
Somehow, yes.
Yeah. Al-Shabaab. A few years ago, nobody had heard of Al-Shabaab. How have they risen? How have they become the force they are today?
Well, nobody has heard about Al-Shabaab. I don't know, because we know that Al-Shabaab and Fazul was implicated in the bombings of 1998. Yes, but anyway, definitely, recently, this issue of Al-Shabaab became a central issue, everybody's mouth, because we are feeling the effects of the action. of Al-Shabaab. But we should not get somehow illusioned by this, because what is happening is because Al-Shabaab has suffered serious defeat in Somalia and now is coming to Kenya to take revenge. So they come with the apparently attractive narrative, false narrative, using religion to have their way, to promote violence, and trying to show that now they will hit Kenya in order for Kenya to give up on the good work that it is doing in Somalia. Yeah. And I have to say that this meeting that you have mentioned, the meeting of the 11th session of the Committee of Intelligence and Security Services of Africa, is taking place in Kenya as a statement of solidarity of the entire African continent with Kenya, with the people of Kenya, who are consenting a lot of sacrifice and effort to make sure that the continent is safe.
Can we win this war? Because every time, and by the way, Al-Shabaab has a great, for lack of a better word, they have a great PR machine. These lies, the propaganda, they're good at propaganda.
Yes.
Can we counter that?
Of course we can. We can. As a state and as a community of states, we can. We need to develop that. We need to develop it and streamline it in a manner that can counter that. We have the capacity to produce better counter-narratives than the narratives that Al-Shabaab is producing. And we should do that.
Why aren't we doing it, Ambassador? Why aren't we doing it?
Well, in some places it's already being done. In some places, Al-Shabaab and other groups, which is not just Al-Shabaab, there are many other terrorist groups, are not having...
Are they active, the others?
Yes, they are active, via this and via many other ways. Yes, they have many tactics. Yes, they are. But we have that capacity, and we are doing it, and we are going to better further, because we are organized. The African Union has put in place institutions, organs that deal with security, including terrorism. And the objective is exactly to work with member states so that all that can be done to make sure that we counter terrorism, be it in terms of public relations, be it in terms of narrative, be it in terms of addressing other conditions conducive to terrorism, are addressed.
When you speak of public relations, Westgate Mall attack must have been a fantastic public relations coup, if you will, for Al-Shabaab. They held a country hostage for 4 days, and they were hailing themselves. I mean, they were waving that flag.
Well, it's an incident. It's an incident that we have to take note of, but it's an incident that has taught us many lessons. We now know better how they act. We now know better who they are. We now know better that they don't respect human rights. They don't respect laws. They don't respect ethics. So we are now in a much better position to face these terrorists. So whenever we act next time, whenever we prepare anything, whenever somebody wants to hire a shop, we know now what questions to put to those people so that these terrorists do not take advantage of this situation.
Can we avoid another Westgate, Ambassador?
Well, we are better prepared. Terrorism is in constant mutation. It takes different tactics. It takes different ways of doing things. So what we can say is that we should be prepared. We are now much better prepared than before. We cannot say that we are not going to have an attack, but what we can assure you is that we are getting prepared that in case such an attack takes place, we are in a position to minimize the consequences of such an attack by quickly identifying who did it, who he is, where did he go, how did he come in, and then neutralize him. We are getting prepared in that sense.
Ambassador, you study this subject often. Could Westgate have been avoided?
Well, I don't know, because this has happened in Kenya. The Kenyans are much better positioned to say whether it could or could not.
When you see the MO, and you've studied this at the center in Algiers where you are, when you see the MO, the method, modus operandi, could it have been avoided?
Well, you can ask, could a war be avoided? Could a thief be impeded from stealing and all that? We still have thieves around. Well, sometimes we manage to stop them, but sometimes they do manage to have their way. Yes.
I guess it's sort of like asking, could 9/11 have been avoided?
Well, whether it hasn't been avoided, that's what I can tell you. Whether it could, I don't know, because I'm not an American. Yes.
Could we avoid another Westgate then?
As I told you, I'm very sure that Kenya is today much better prepared to face such kind of threats than perhaps it was in the past. So it is much prepared, better prepared.
Yeah.
And better prepared to avoid these things from happening any suddenly. They would have to be extremely sophisticated to be able to repeat such a situation.
Al-Shabaab keeps saying the reason why they keep attacking Kenya is because Kenya has forces in Somalia.
There is solidarity on the continent. We have what we call a peace and security architecture, African Union peace and security architecture. It is based on solidarity. It's based on regional organization, regional solidarity and common approach to threats to security. So we need to ensure that the continent is safe. Al-Shabaab is a terrorist organization. Is threatening an African Union member state. The African Union decided to go into Somalia with the support and request by a legitimate government of that country to flush out Al-Shabaab. And in fact, I must tell you, these people are being beaten. These people are suffering defeats, serious ones. In the past, you could hardly speak about a Somali with a government, a running government. Today, you have in Mogadishu a government and a parliament that is working.
A government and a parliament that's working. But, Ambassador, and I want to talk about this after the break, Al-Shabaab has hit even at the gates of parliament, at the gates of the presidency. That's how bold and brash and audacious they are. Hold that thought. I want to talk about that. Also, let's cross over the continent and go to Boko Haram. How does Boko Haram kidnap more than 200 school kids and then continue to kidnap and kidnap and kidnap, and no one's attacking them, no one's getting them back? Hold the thought, Ambassador. I want to talk more about that because I think we're failing. Maybe you know better. Maybe you have the intelligence. Ambassador Francisco Caetano Jose Madeira. He's at the African Union's Center for the Study and Research of Terrorism, based in Algiers, another place where terrorism was big in the 90s until it was quashed. We're talking about terrorism, extremism, radicalization, how to win the war.